No, I got it. I'm fine. Well, they're keeping my remote. Okay.
Sounds like that chicken's pretty good, doesn't it, Cary?
Good afternoon, Cary Rotary Club. Welcome to the most friendliest, fired us up, collegially motivated club in District 7710. It's great to see everybody here. Second Tuesday. Can I ask Mr. Bill Fletcher to please lead us in the prayer and the pledge?
Let us pray. Mighty God, we praise you today for this beautiful day, even though it may be cloudy. We thank you for the opportunity to serve as part of the Rotary organization and this club. We ask your blessing on our leadership, as well as those in elected office in our state and nation. We ask you to continue to guide us and how we might be of best service to our community and to our world. We ask you to bless this food now and the nourishment of our bodies and us to your service, and we give you praise for it. And I'll end the prayer as you will, and I will say in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
God bless America. All right. Well, we have no visiting Rotarians today. We have no guests of Rotarians today, but I do want to welcome two folks that are not members of our club that are with us. Janine An and Chelsea Chen are colleagues of our speaker. Welcome, Janine. Welcome, Chelsea. And we'll keep a side eye on the screen so that when Levi joins us, he'll be suitably introduced by Mr. Bolton. I also want to welcome back Mr. Jerry Miller. It's so wonderful to see you, Jerry, after your time away.
Beautiful arrangement of edible fruit. Edible fruit. Big. And then I got a birthday card. I got a big love card from it. So I want to thank all of you for that. Appreciate it. I'm doing good. I'll be back at Crescent full speed. All right.
Fantastic to see you, Jerry. It's certainly proof that positive thoughts, positive energy, not to mention a strong will, can help do wonders. So great to have you back. I also wanted to share with you, I don't see Dorothy online today, although she frequently joins us. We received a thank you note from Dorothy Schmelzeis as well, so I'll just read that quickly to you. Dear Rotary friends, thank you for being so thoughtful. The fruit bouquet you sent was beautiful and tasty too. I look forward to being with all of you soon. All the best wishes, Dorothy. So we're so thrilled that Dorothy's also on the mend after her surgery. And again, our thoughts, prayers, and just positive energy has helped her in her recovery, I'm sure. Last week, you'll recall that we had a nomination for a new board member to the Rotary Club Charitable Foundation. And after now the required waiting period of 7 days, I'd like to call the question. All those in favor of appointing Dr. Bruce Howell to the Cary Charitable Foundation, please say aye. Aye. Dr. Bruce, congratulations. Approved by acclamation. Thank you. So pleased to have that resource. I know I'll speak for Scott and Reggie on that respect. I'll look forward to having that wisdom a year from now. I don't know how closely you check your email. And I don't know how many emails you get on a daily basis that look like they're coming from DAC-DB. But there's a special one that came out earlier this week that I'm going to suggest you go back and dig to. And that is the District 7710 Rotary newsletter. Because we have a friend who is featured as the Rotarian of the Month with an article in that magazine. And Mary DePucan is highlighted for her leadership and contribution to Rotary. It's always fantastic when one of our club members gets recognition, and certainly there's none more deserving. I'll say that. A lot deserving, none more deserving. So congratulations, Mary, and thanks for flying the colors for the club. And with that, I'm going to call on Mary in just a moment to give us an update on our Polio Plus campaign. So hang on, Mary.
Am I good, Bob? Okay, I think he said I'm good. So I just wanted to give everyone an update. We've gotten really good response, a nice response. As of today, I've added a couple more people. And so we are up to 13 Rotarians who have either decided to give $10 a month to Polio Plus via their credit card, or are going to send me a check in the amount of $120. And I will go ahead and send that on to the Rotary Foundation on their behalf for Polio Plus. So very excited about that. I think that's a really good start. And I'll be able to give some numbers to Randy Lickey, who comes to speak with us, past District Governor Randy Lickey, who comes to speak with us on about polio and some exciting news that's going on in polio next week. So again, next week, I don't know if this is going to work. Can you see that? No, probably not. Oh, well, it's because I have a virtual background. But I have, in the past, we've had the notices on the table for people to sign up to be for Polio Plus, and if they want to give a contribution. So we'll have those again on the tables next week on the 19th. So again, thank you for everyone supporting Polio Plus. As a club, we do not invoice for that. So it is a member's contribution on their own. It's not part of our dues or anything like that. So, or part of what we give to the Rotary Foundation. So
Mary?
thank you again. Yeah.
Mary, how many total club members are part of Polio Plus?
Well, we have 13 that have signed up this year. I'll need to check back with a couple people who signed up as Polio Plus Society members, which
Yeah.
they said they would do every year. And I need to follow up with them to make sure that that's still, the case. And I will ask them to, again, send me a check.
Yeah, that's just good information for Randy for next week.
Yes, yes, thank you. That's it. Thank you very much. Anybody contact me that's interested in doing $10 a month on your credit card or giving a contribution to Polio Plus. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Mary, for that report. And we'll look forward to welcoming Randy. Thank you to every club member that supported our campaign. It's going to be a good feeling to present an extra $1,000 check to Polio Plus. So your generosity, as always, is in full display. So without further ado, let's move to our program. Can I ask David Coulter to please come and introduce our speaker?
Thank you, President Bob. Before I introduce Levi Browde, I want to make just two comments. One is, I can't tell you how wonderful it is to have a president who works so diligently on all the technical stuff. Can you say back and forth? I will tell you, so often when we have guests such as Levi speak to us, they do a test run. So he's doing stuff even before the meeting. So that is just an amazing president. So Bob, thanks so much. The other comment I want to make is, as you listen to this presentation today, just remember how lucky we are. How lucky we are as a country and as a group of us. So Levi Browde served as the executive director with the New York-based Falun Dafa Information Center, an organization dedicated to ending human rights abuses against people who practice Falun Gong in China. A career software entrepreneur, Levi's life changed dramatically in 1999 when his best friend came to the office one morning and announced the Chinese Communist Party had taken away his mother in Beijing to be tortured and brainwashed. This marked the beginning of his volunteer work to defend human rights in China. 2 years later, Levi himself was detained in a Chinese jail outside of Beijing for secretly meeting with Western reporters and protesting on the Tiananmen Square. Over the past 20 years, he has been interviewed and quoted by the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Chicago Tribune, CNN, the Associated Press, Time Magazine, BBC, and other media outlets. He has spoken about the Falun Gong and human rights in China at briefings on Capitol Hill, in Washington, at the United Nations Human Rights Sessions in Geneva, Switzerland. He studied East Asian studies at Wesleyan University and is an avid supporter of traditional Chinese culture. He's founded several startups and lives in New York with his wife and 2 sons. So please welcome Levi Browde. Levi.
Okay, thank you very much. Can everybody, quick sound check, everybody hear me okay? Thumbs up? Okay, good. So most of what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through a PowerPoint presentation. So let me switch over. I'm going to share my screen and just make sure everybody can see that. So you should see a slide that says Communist China in Our Lives. Does that look okay? Okay, great. So yeah, thank you very much for having me. I really enjoy speaking to groups like this. I'm going to be talking about Falun Gong as sort of a case study to understanding the threat of the CCP to this country, because not only have I been working in the human rights space in Falun Gong for over 20 years, I am, let's just say, a student of this country. My father is a law professor who specializes in the US Constitution. He's the one who really taught me how to read and write and think critically. I've read probably every major biography of our founders. And so it's very near and dear to my heart in terms of not just human rights abuses around the world, but how they affect this country. And I think that's the focus of today's talk. We're going to spend most of our time looking at the Falun Gong as a case study to understand the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party. But then I'm going to come back around to what does that mean for us as Americans, not just also from the human rights standpoint and from wanting to protect human rights around the world, but also what that means for us in our backyard here in America. Okay, but before I get into any of that, I just want to do a couple of a little bit of background, because this is something that perhaps we're not all very aware of, and that is, one is this new phenomenon of the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, and how embedded it is into our society. Government, business, media, big tech. This is unprecedented. To have a foreign power, particularly a dictatorial, hostile foreign power, being this coupled to our country. And just to give you some sort of examples of what that looks like, for example, in our government, we have many, both current and former leaders of our government who are very high wealth individuals, and most of that wealth comes from the CCP, businesses in China. We know that there's a lot of lobbying that happens from Beijing to Wall Street to Washington, DC. And we know from personal experience that there is an enormous amount of direct communication and pressure from Chinese diplomats, not only to our federal officials, but our state officials, our local town councils, things of that nature. The influence of the CCP in our business and media and entertainment is enormous. You probably all remember the tweet that the Houston Rockets GM sent out, I guess it was a year and a half ago now, supporting democracy in Hong Kong. And immediately the entire NBA was essentially silenced because of the billion-dollar business they have in China. You see that kind of leverage going into our media institutions, our entertainment institutions. Another example, a single investment bank in the US made $500 million underwriting taking Chinese companies public in our stock market. So the amount of money and influence between the CCP and our country is tremendous. Most of our big tech firms either manufacture most of their stuff in China or are looking to China as their single biggest growth market. And so it's something that's very close to them as well. And even our universities, over the last, 8 years or so, over $1 billion the CCP has given to various prestigious universities around the world, and operated other programs to either leverage or outright steal some of the talents and research of our researchers, and even operating cells on campus on sort of controlling kind of what the students, what they say and what they do. So again, I'm just running through a couple quick examples, but it all comes to this logical conclusion that right now we have an unprecedented coupling between our country and a hostile dictatorship. And we've never faced that before. So what does that really mean? Well, in order to answer that question, we have to understand kind of a little bit of the history of China, and we're going to look at the Falun Gong issue as an explanation as to what the real nature of the CCP is. So first, let's do a brief history of China, because this is not something we cover a lot in our educational institutions here in the West. One thing to note about China, it is the oldest contiguous civilization on Earth. For 5,000 years, they've had dynasty after dynasty, a contiguous civilization in that part of the world. It's a very spiritual civilization. And out of China came Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism, and it very much integrates these into your life. So the whole culture, the traditional culture of China is very embedded into sort of its spiritual foundations. And that's been a hallmark of traditional Chinese culture for thousands of years. And even if you look at the last 2,000 years, I mean, China, Beijing, and other capitals of that country have really been the big player on earth for thousands of years. If you look at the last 2,000 years, they had the largest GDP by far of any other country. And they're also major leaders in political, economic, and cultural sectors as well. But all that kind of changed in the early 1800s, where the dynasty started to wane. They had the Opium Wars with Britain and just a lot of uprisings internally. And then, of course, hostilities with Japan, World War II. I mean, it was a very difficult 120 years in China. And it was in very tattered condition come 1949, when the Chinese Communist Party seized upon this condition and they took power in the country. So starting in 1949, the communists take over. There was a fledgling democracy in China at that time that had been in operation for a couple decades. They fled to Taiwan. And what happened in China over the last 70, 75 years is just devastating, deadly political campaign after political campaign. Conservative estimates say 60 to 80 million people have been killed. And again, that's not because of war or disease or anything like that. This is because of the tyranny of the CCP, primarily, or specifically rather, its habit of every 10 years or so creating a new campaign where they go after one group of people and to eliminate them, and then they terrorize the rest of the people thinking, well, I don't want to be next. And that's been going on and on. The first of these that we really saw up close, of course, was the Tiananmen Square massacre. When they went after Falun Gong, starting 22 years ago, it was the latest in a string of these campaigns, and it's important to sort of understand it in that context. What they're doing to Falun Gong now and have been is very similar to what they've done to other groups over the last 70, 75 years. So let's take a closer look at what that looks like, the Falun Gong issue. So first of all, a little background. I mean, maybe you've heard a little bit about it in the news, but let's give a little bit of background of what Falun Gong is. So Falun Gong is a Buddhist-based spiritual practice. It involves a sitting meditation, slow motion exercises, and the studying of moral principles that are sort of rooted in the Buddhist tradition, particularly the principles of truthfulness or honesty, compassion, and tolerance. To practice Falun Gong really means to do the meditation, the slow motion exercises, and also to study these principles and try and develop these principles in your own character. It's free to learn and there's no membership. There's no structure to it or anything like that. The teachings were made available for free in China, and anybody who knows about it could just pick it up and learn. So there's really no organization or structure to it. It's a grassroots spiritual practice. So the way although it has thousands of years of tradition in traditional Chinese culture and the spirituality of traditional Chinese culture, Falun Gong itself was only first made public in 1992. For 2 years, the founder, Mr. Li Hongzhi, was invited by various government agencies and civic organizations around China to teach the practice, which is what he did for 2 years. And then he wrote the primary book, Zhuan Falun, for Falun Gong, and that became a bestseller in 1996. And from then, it really just took off by word of mouth. The government was very happy about it because it was reducing a lot of medical costs, people getting very healthy from chronic illnesses to even, things that were terminal. It was being very effective at lifting up people's health, and the government loved that because it's saving them a lot of money. So the 1990s, Falun Gong was widely popular. I mean, by the end of by 1999, a government survey determined there were 100 million people practicing. That's 1 out of every 13 people in the country. So it's enormously popular. The government's happy about it. The people are very happy about it because this was like, they've had decades under communist atheist rule, and this was the first thing that came along that was authentically Chinese. I mean, it was from the heartland of China. So it was a very active time that decade. It had also spread throughout the world. I mean, right now Falun Gong is practiced in over 100 countries around the world. The books have been translated into 40 different languages, but primarily the largest group obviously is inside China. So with all that's going on in the 90s and everybody's really happy about it, and it's bringing people a lot of good health, what happened? three things really came to a head. First of all, when the Chinese government did that survey and found that there were 100 million people practicing, well, that's way more than the members of the Communist Party, and that made a few leaders nervous. The second thing was, it wasn't just an exercise meditation practice, it really had a spiritual component. And the Chinese Communist Party had just spent decades trying to stamp out traditional Chinese culture so it could inculcate people with atheism and Marxism. Falun Gong is really a throwback. And so ideologically, there was a concern there among some top leaders. But the main reason was that the former leader of the CCP, the leader at the time, actually in 1999, he had come to power because of his support of cracking down on the students in Tiananmen Square. He didn't go through the revolution. He didn't have a lot of credibility among his peers. So he was sort of desperate to build up this sort of cult of personality around himself. And right as he's trying to do that, boom, along comes Falun Gong and just takes the scene by storm. And everybody's talking about Falun Gong. And it was the exact opposite of what he wanted to do. So in 1999, he's the one who gave the order, we must eliminate this group. Because Falun Gong was so well known and popular, he couldn't rely on local police and the police apparatus, the military apparatus. So what he did was he set up his own office called the 610 office. And China experts actually call this China's Gestapo. Its sole mission was to stamp out Falun Gong. And they could get you fired from your job, kicked out of university, throw you into a labor camp or a prison without any trial. They were the ones who first started using torture on a widespread scale throughout China, various brainwashing techniques, all to try and break down Falun Gong people and get them to give up their faith and get them to be a pledge loyalty to the CCP. And pretty quickly, people started dying because of this all around China. So again, this started back in 1999. A key component of this obviously was propaganda. That is usually the case with the communist regime, even more so because of this, because the regime had to undo a lot of the good feelings that people had towards Falun Gong. And they did that through just relentless propaganda, just making up all kinds of demonic things and saturating the television, newspapers, everything for many, 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 many months to get people to either believe it or be so scared that the regime was going after Falun Gong that they would be scared into submission, that they wouldn't say anything, that they'd go quiet. Because again, they'd seen this kind of thing. They've been through decades of these kind of horrific campaigns against different groups of people. So when the CCP went after Falun Gong, a lot of Chinese people recognized it. And they said, uh-oh, here's a new campaign against a group of people. We have to get away from them or we're next. And so the propaganda was a real cornerstone on getting the rank and file and the whole country kind of mobilized behind this campaign against Falun Gong. One of the real horrors that came out of this was something called forced organ harvesting. Now, forced organ harvesting is essentially taking detainees, matching them for their organs, killing them, extracting their organs, and using that in an organ transplant operation. Now, because of the way Chinese culture works, there is no viable donation program in China, and consequently, they do almost no organ transplant operations. All that completely changed the year after Falun Gong was banned. For the first time, you had hundreds of thousands, in some instances, millions of Falun Gong people being held in prisons and black jails and labor camps. And suddenly, the organ transplantation skyrocketed in China. And hospitals around the country were advertising wait times of like a week or 2 weeks. Normally you have to wait many years for an organ. And several investigators worked on this for a few years, and that culminated actually 2 years ago in a tribunal that was held in London and chaired by Jeffrey Nice, who was the prosecutor who put Slobodan Milosevic behind bars in the former Yugoslavia. So he headed up a tribunal that lasted for a year. They conducted investigations with people coming in from 50 different countries, and their conclusion was that Falun Gong people had all this time and continue today to be killed for their organs on a significant scale. Some of the investigators, like investigative journalist Ethan Gutman or the former Secretary of State Asia Pacific, David Kilgore in Canada, estimate that there are 60 or 70,000 people per year that are killed so their organs can be taken and used in transplantation operations. So this has been happening for the last, 16, 17 years in China. So the end result here is that over the last 22 years, and again, continuing very much into today, millions of people have either been fired or kicked out of university, put into prison camp, torture, or killed. We have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of individual cases of torture and abuse. We know that almost 5,000 people have been tortured to death, but those are just the ones we've been able to document. People were brave enough to get their details out of China. That's really just the tip of the iceberg, and it doesn't count for the tens of thousands that are likely being killed every single year for organ harvesting. So this is the state of China, and this is what the CCP has been doing to Falun Gong for the last 20 years. The international response was fairly good right at the beginning. Whether it was the United Nations Human Rights Committees or Freedom House, Amnesty International, right away they recognized what was going on and they started documenting the arbitrary detention, imprisonment, torture, and killing of Falun Gong. Our government and governments in Europe and other countries have been fairly vocal about this. The United States Congress has passed 5 resolutions condemning what's going on in China and supporting Falun Gong. Initially, some of the press was very good. The Wall Street Journal actually won the Pulitzer Prize in 2000, specifically for a series of articles where they first documented that, yes, Falun Gong were indeed being held in these prisons and being tortured to death. The Washington Post had a groundbreaking piece later that year where they were the first ones to get a Chinese official on record that says, this torturing that's going on isn't just rogue police. This is mandated from Beijing as one of the techniques they must use on Falun Gong in order to break them. So some of that initial coverage was quite good. Very soon, however, the coverage fell off a cliff. You probably have noticed that there hasn't been anything in the news in more than 16 years, really, in terms of meaningful reporting about Falun Gong in China. And there are reasons for that. We could talk about that maybe a little bit in the QA if you have questions on what's going on there. Pivoting to the US, I think what's interesting to note is a couple things that have happened to Falun Gong, or the extent of things that have happened to Falun Gong here in the United States. And just to give you a sense for the level of importance this is for the Chinese regime. So back in 1999, during the APEC meeting, Jiang Zemin, who was the head of the country at the time, when he met with President Bill Clinton during this meeting, the very first thing he did was had him a big stack of books about Falun Gong, demonizing the practice and trying to justify what they're doing to Falun Gong. 2 years later, when Condoleezza Rice took over as National Security Advisor, her very first meeting with her high-level counterparts, those Chinese officials came in and Condoleezza wanted to talk about real security issues. Instead, they pulled out a prepared statement on Falun Gong, just demonizing Falun Gong, and proceeded to read it for like 20 minutes. She finally had to kick him out of the office. So this is how important it has been for the CCP to try and justify or at least keep the lid on what they're doing to Falun Gong in China. And, those are just high-level examples. This is happening at every level. State governors, mayors, council members, all across the United States. We've also faced a lot of physical attacks. The gentleman down there in the bottom left, marked Atlanta, he was an IT expert that was working on technology to help the Chinese people get to the free internet and break out of the firewall that the country has over its internet. 2 Asian men showed up at his door one day. They beat him bloody, took nothing in his home except 2 of his laptops and left him bleeding on his front lawn. His neighbors found him later. And this is in a nice suburb of Atlanta. The bottom right photo is an Iraqi war veteran who was off fighting in Iraq. And then he heard what happened. His mother was in New York and she was attacked by a bunch of Chinese thugs at the instigation of the New York Chinese consulate. He came back from war and held a press conference. Obviously, he was very upset about that. So these are just sort of examples of the type of thuggery that's happening to Falun Gong here in the US. There are other examples. The California State Assembly wanted to pass a resolution to support Falun Gong. The Chinese consulate came in, pressured them, and they chose not to do so. We've had satellite companies who are broadcasting democracy type content into China, including reporting on what was happening with Falun Gong. Chinese regime came in, threatened to not let them cover the Olympics, gave them $1 billion contract, and suddenly they cut that feed and we're no longer broadcasting those democracy stations into China. There's been other instances in media. That the Chinese regime, for example, has spent millions of dollars putting inserts into all of our major newspapers with their propaganda. There's a lot to go over, way too much that we could cover this afternoon, but I think it all points to two conclusions that I think we should think about. One is that I think the persecution of Falun Gong reveals the nature of the CCP. We need to understand what we're dealing with when we're brokering a business deal or doing some kind of government cooperation with the CCP. Yeah, I think it's important to really understand who we're working with. And the persecution of Falun Gong brings that out in very clear ways. The second thing is to learn is that if they can target Falun Gong in the US, they can and they have target anyone else in our country. If they can pull the levers of power of our government, our media, our businesses to go after Falun Gong, they can do it to others. And they have. I mean, again, coming back to that situation with the Houston Rockets, they were able to silence the entire NBA simply by their financial power. So what can we do about that? There's a few things. One thing is exactly what you guys are doing. I think this is enormously important and shouldn't be minimized in any way. We got into this mess largely because we didn't really understand the CCP and the danger it posed. And so doing the work that you guys are doing, bringing into either speakers like me or people who are victims that have actually escaped from China and tell you what's really going on inside the country is enormously important, because we can't be vigilant against something if we don't know it's there, or we don't know the extent of the threat it poses. We also have, for some more casual environments, we have a number of award-winning documentaries that we can host a movie night, even have the director, the producer come in and answer questions that cover a lot of the in-depth parts of this Falun Gong story and what it means for anyone interacting with the CCP. And of course, tell your representatives, and I don't just mean federal, I mean federal for sure, but the CCP, it is amazing. They have ties to universities, to city governments, to state governments. Find out what those are in your city, in your state, and make your concerns known to the relevant government leaders in your area. That's enormously important. There's a number of ways to stay informed. We have a newsletter that goes out every 2 weeks. You can subscribe to that. It kind of keeps you not up to date just on the Falun Gong issue, but the ripple effects. From Hong Kong to Paris to the United States. I'd also say, and that you might have seen posters for this performing arts group, it would be really important to see this performance. Now, Shenyang Performing Arts is a very interesting group because they brought together the world's leading traditional Chinese or the classical Chinese dancers and musicians, and they formed a performing arts company right here in New York. But what they're really doing is bringing back traditional Chinese culture as it was before it was nearly wiped out by communism. And they do it in a wonderfully accessible and very uplifting way. And so in order to sort of reconnect with what is really traditional Chinese culture and what is it that the Chinese Communist Party has been trying to stamp out, this show really encompasses a lot of it. And it's very, I mean, it's a wonderful experience. It's a very uplifting experience, but it's a very unique and interesting insight into what real traditional Chinese culture is all about. So if you see these posters in your city in the coming season, I'd encourage you to grab a ticket and go see this show. Okay, just in closing, just two quick sensitive topics that sort of tend to hover around this issue. And that is, the CCP likes to defer criticism of it by saying, oh, you're offending the Chinese people, as if those two are the same thing. They're not. Over the last 20 years, many of my Chinese friends have tried to impress this upon me. The CCP is not the Chinese people. The Chinese people have a wonderful, glorious culture. They're great people. And to criticize what the CCP is doing to the Chinese government in no way offends the Chinese people at all. And don't let the CCP or sort of their agents convince you otherwise. The second thing to talk about is that, a lot of the Chinese people, they grew up, we don't know what it's like to grow up in a communist country, and the amount of sort of programming that starts even at a very young age. And, you know, I knew this young lady who came out of China shortly after the Tiananmen Square massacre, very well-educated woman, went to a top university. And in the first semester, there was this tense point with her friends in America where the Tiananmen Square massacre came up, and her friends told her that, you know, what it was, a massacre. And she says, what are you talking about? It wasn't a massacre. I saw on TV, this was violent, out of control students that were destroying Beijing and killing soldiers. I saw tanks burning. I saw the bodies of soldiers burning. And luckily, our government benevolently stepped in and restored order. That was her thinking process. And this is a very well-educated woman. I mean, she's come to the top university here in America. And I find that you get a lot of these, you know, these key sort of political or propaganda points that the CCP has been pushing. You know, a lot of them have been struggling with what they've been told their whole life, and then they come outside of China and sort of they're met with a different reality. And whether it's Tiananmen Square, whether it's the Dalai Lama, whether it's Taiwan or Falun Gong. And so you might get some resistance among even Chinese colleagues and friends. And I think it's important to have some empathy about what they've been through and how they were, you know, the educational system that they're reared in. And it just takes some patience. So, okay, the last couple slides are just showing you a couple references for further information. This is our main website, faluninfo.net. We have a streaming site where you can watch free documentaries on these topics. Friends of Falun Gong is an advocacy organization if you want to get involved and help. FalunDafa.org is the actual website of the practice if you want to learn more about the practice itself, the exercises and the teachings. And of course, Shenyang.org is the performing arts company I mentioned that's really doing a wonderful job of bringing back traditional Chinese culture. Okay, I apologize. I think I ran a couple minutes over, but I tried to squeeze it all in there. Totally happy to answer any questions that you have at this point.
Levi, we do have a couple questions that came through the chat. One is from Mary Cam, just asking, you know, if we are outraged, our government is outraged by these practices, what sanctions have been levied, if anything, and what are the prospects for additional?
Very good question. Actually, both the previous administration and the current administration have sanctioned Chinese officials that specifically because they took a role in persecuting Falun Gong. And I think it's interesting to note about that because what does it really do? Well, it prevents that official or any of its immediate family from traveling to the US and can potentially free some of its assets. It might not seem that bad. What's really interesting is that news of that sanction makes its way into mainland China very quickly via underground media, grassroots media that goes on in that country. And very quickly, police chiefs, security chiefs around the country, it really has a huge impact because they think, am I next? Am I the one who's going to get sanctioned by the US? And so that kind of activity, while it might seem a bit symbolic or light-handed, it does have a huge impact. So that's something both administrations have done, and we encourage more of it.
John Rigsby asked that you discussed China before communism. Is there any hope for a China after communism? And what would that look like?
For sure. I think there is hope. I mean, I think the CCP tries to convince the West that the Chinese people don't really like democracy or it doesn't work with their culture. Not true. Taiwan is the biggest example. Taiwan is the exact same language and culture and history and ethnicity, and they have a flourishing democracy there. Democracy can certainly take hold in mainland China. The issue is, will the CCP recognize that and step down? Is there going to be some sort of peaceful resolution to this? Because right now, the CCP controls China in a much more draconian way than we see on TV or even in the headlines in our news. That's the real problem.
Got it. Blair Hatcher is wondering, do you have an opinion on the origin theories related to COVID?
I'd say two things. One of the main investigators of organ harvesting made an important analysis, and that is, if the world had been serious about organ harvesting and making the CCP stop organ harvesting, part of the solution would have been a system of transparency into the medical system in China in order to make sure organ harvesting had really stopped. If that system of transparency had been in place, we would have seen what was happening in Wuhan on December 30th and been able to really protect the entire world from COVID. And what proves that theory is Taiwan. What makes Taiwan different is that their doctors were actually on WeChat on the night that the COVID virus was being talked about among the Wuhan doctors. 2 days later, Taiwan had already taken steps to curb travel from China and various other steps right away. It's like the virus has never been to Taiwan. They've been completely open. Universities are open, shops are open. I mean, it's a totally different world. So I think that proves that if we had taken those things seriously and had real insight into that, we would have been able to stop it. Now, to your specific question, from what I've seen so far, looking at the cover up and some of the evidence about how the virus was actually being contracted by people in Wuhan as early as the summer of 2019, the most probable explanation is a lab leak. It hasn't been proven yet, but at this point, it's more probable than a natural origin, just from what I've seen.
Got it. Thank you, Levi. I'm going to turn the program over here to my colleague Leon Abbas, who will express our thanks.
Okay.
Thank you very much for your message. Candidly, it's very sobering. Frankly, it scared me. I simply did not know. And we deeply appreciate your sharing it with us. We thank you for that. I'm going to deliver to your emissary here in the room some note cards from a member of our club who's an artist, and Jerry Miller's cards are in my hand, and she'll have them in a few seconds. And we thank you for your time and for sharing.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leon, and thank you, Levi. Just to wrap up, we've got some birthdays and anniversaries to share. Dawn Finkbeiner is online, I believe. Dawn celebrates a birthday today. Happy birthday, Dawn. Tomorrow, Neil Lagarde. And also I saw Dorothy come online. Dorothy, happy birthday to you tomorrow. Tim Mannix, I know you're online. Don't forget to wish your bride a happy birthday on the 18th, next Monday. Happy birthday, Kathy Mannix. In terms of club anniversaries, Gail Cabrera and Kevin Peach both will celebrate their first anniversary with the club on the 15th, Friday. And Ben Shiver, Ben, where are you? There you are, Ben. Congratulations on your anniversary Thursday. 24 years with our club and 13 as a Rotarian before that. So 37 years as a Rotarian. David, Friday's a special day for you and Susan, so don't forget to wish happy anniversary to your wife, Susan. And we congratulate Scott and Allison Gardner, who will celebrate a wedding anniversary on the 18th, which is Monday. Next week's program, as Mary mentioned, past District Governor Randy Lickey will be with us for our celebration of World Polio Day. It's going to be really fantastic to be able to brag a little bit on our club and hear about some really exciting news that he's going to share about progress in the fight against polio. Your guess is as good as mine, but it looks like the meal is going to be meatloaf with some mashed potatoes and carrots. In 2 weeks, Troy Burton will be with us, thanks to Paul Sossman. Troy is with the Parks Department in Raleigh, and so he'll be sharing information about holiday programs in Raleigh. Can't believe we're approaching the holiday already. With that, I want to thank you, Levi, Janine, Chelsea, for joining us. An inspirational and thought-provoking program. Are thrilled to have you with us and encourage you in your battle to inform folks around the globe and to protect people that are practicing their religious freedom. Don't forget, speaking of freedom, We are supporting the Raleigh Triangle Refugee Project with bedding and cookware. Thank you for those that have brought in gifts. By the end of October, we'll be delivering all those over through our friends at Green Hope High School. So with that, Camille, can I ask you to lead us out on the four-way test?
Please join me in reciting the four-way test of the things we think, say, or do.
This is true. To share all concerned. Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? Have a great week, everybody.